Yeah. Never not, never under God, never ever, I'm forever on. Check my weapon on, check my repertoire, don't check me not. Let's just checks involved. I've been feeling like I'm next to God, next to God, next to God.
This is a video I was watching earlier, and obviously taking this class, first things first, we talk about Genesis 1, 2, 3 because origins of mankind. So if we're going to start anywhere in this podcast, I think this is the perfect place for us to start. So let's talk about the beginning. And essentially, a lot of people refer to this as the fall of man or the fall of human nature or all kinds of other weird shit. But anyways, I'm going to start this video towards the very end where he says something about lesbians. And I really wanted to get your reaction out of it because the whole video has been not so bad. It's been just kind of giving me a summary. I was listening to it at work because I was like, you know what? I don't really fuck with going out of my own time to read all this shit and look into this and, for homework purposes. I hate it. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to listen to it while I'm at work, not have to deal with it, have it in the background. I understand it. I don't have to read it. So all perfectly fine up until the very end here where the pastor or the guy, he bleeds his personality or his views onto something that had nothing to do with this. So, so all of a sudden he's making examples outside of him summarizing Genesis. And it just kind of gave me a little bit of insight into the way of thinking for a lot of people who are super religious. And it's kind of like, one of those things where somebody has really negative thoughts, but they don't let it be known. But sometimes they let things certain slip, kind of like racists slipping the N-word here and there, or when they're mad, or they observe something that triggers them, and then you can kind of see their true colors. This was one of those instances, and I kind of wanted to get your reaction. So we're going to start off, and we're going to hear some things that have nothing to do with the lesbians, but once we get to the part, I want to get your insight on that too.
Oh, good and evil. Well, she already knew good. What happened to make her know evil was she did it. She knew it not by cognition. She knew it by what? Experience. Nothing in the fruit that was evil. That tree was as good as any tree. God made that tree. It was good, and all the fruit in it was good. The evil was in the heart of Eve. She knew the evil, not from some magic potion in the fruit, but from her heart. She had distrusted God's character, she had impugned God's motives, and she had disobeyed God's word. She dragged God down. She stopped believing he was the God he was. And she saw him as a flawed God with corrupt motives and evil intent. And that's always been Satan's lie, to tell people that the forbidden fruit is the doorway to fulfillment, right? What a lie. What a lie. So, at the point we are in verse 5, her mind is gone and she's fallen. What's left is her emotions and her body, and they will follow. Because when lust conceives, where's that? James 1, when lust conceives, it brings forth sin. It's conceived in her mind now. She has fallen. It'll move to her emotions, and then it'll move to her will, and then it will show up in her behavior. So we've seen the solicitor and the strategy. The next point for next week, the seduction. And we'll see how it moved from her mind to her emotions and her will and her behavior, and then what happened as a result. You know what he's saying? Bottom line, God doesn't love you. God doesn't love you. I love you. I'm the one who loves you. I have your freedom in mind. I don't want to restrict you. Yeah, I heard that on the television the other night. Somebody was talking about the lesbians. I guess there's a new movie all about lesbians. And they were saying, well, I don't know why anybody wants to sit in judgment on this. We all just need to love. And you know what that is? The love of hell is what it is. It's Satan who's saying, I'm the true lover. I love you so much. I don't want to restrain your freedoms. Don't let God come along and restrict you and tell you if you break his law, you die. Who would you rather believe? That's easy for unregenerate people, isn't it?
There you go. Where he justifies, because, people say, how is it possible that gay or being a lesbian is a sin if you're expressing love? Love is a positive emotion, right? And in my mind, I'm thinking, hey, how can you argue that? How can you argue with the fact that love is good, good is love, and anything that comes out of love comes out of kindness of the heart or, passion or nurture. And he kind of explained it to me right then and there where that process sits at. It's false love. In his opinion, he considered that and labeled it as hell's love, which is pretty fucked up in my opinion.
Love of hell.
Yeah, love of hell. And he perceives it as being Satan's influence over somebody because they love somebody of the same sex. That's fucking crazy. And there's a lot of things in Genesis that really fucking confuse me. Because when I was reading it, instead of seeing something that a lot of people treat as historical information, for example, a lot of the times when I'm discussing with people in my class about this, they think and they treat it as historical documentation, saying that this happened, this is concrete, this is why things are the way they are. How familiar are you with Genesis? I'm pretty sure you're pretty. So, because of the fact that they ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, I used to think it was just a fucking tree of knowledge, but because they ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, that is where God punishes them, and there is suffering in the world. Women have painful childbirth, and all these crazy things are going on in the world, and they
it's all the fault of a woman.
Yes, and that was the next point I was going to make. A lot of the blame is put on Eve. And the guy, even in this, earlier on in the video, he talks about a whole lot of emphasis on, well, if I was Eve, I would have just simply done this or that, or this and this and that. And I don't know, bro. It's really upsetting because you can kind of see those very old ways of thinking that they wanted people to be influenced by the Bible. And by that I mean that conversation where I believe that the Bible was written in many ways to control the masses, including religion in itself. Because the way this thing is written and described, a lot of it derives from the idea that it's our fault. It's not God's fault that any of this happened. As a matter of fact, we are sinful by nature. And I don't like the idea of being sinful by nature because, in my opinion, they make it seem like free will is bad. But I think free will is good. I think knowledge is good. And when I see Genesis, I don't necessarily see this being a historical documentation of what happened with the origins of man, but instead I see this as kind of a story with a moral. And the moral is, if you're fucking ignorant, bad shit happens. Because, let's be honest here, when Eve gets spoken to by the reptile, she doesn't know any better, right? She doesn't have that knowledge of good and bad that God is keeping them away from. So everything that they see, in my opinion, they never knew was bad because God made everything good. And the only thing bad in the story that I came across that first came out when he said this was not good was man being alone. And that's why Eve came about, because he was like, oh, well, I created this is good, I created man, this is good, I created animals, this is good, but man being in solidarity, that is not good. So he introduces Eve into the picture. And she would not have known any better that anything else in that garden was not good. And there's a lot of other questions that come up from this. One, obviously, God being all-knowing, omniscient. Why is he bringing these human beings into a plane where he knows Lucifer is roaming in? There's no way he doesn't know or understand the fact that Lucifer is there. You just can't, because he created something out of nothing, and all of a sudden Lucifer's here, or somebody's acting on behalf of Lucifer. Why couldn't you just tell Adam or Eve, to and instead of just saying, all right, you can eat from whatever the fuck you want except from this one tree. Instead of saying, hey, yeah, you can eat whatever you want except from this one tree, and by the way, there's a fucking serpent out there who's going to try to convince you to fucking eat from this tree to, destroy our relationship with one another. Because that's another point that they make in this. Another point that they make in this is, this incident is when man breaks his or her bond with God. That is when the relationship is severed, it is broken. God says, fuck you, but not really fuck you. I'm still going to take care of you, but you guys are now destined to live a life with suffering. And they use Genesis kind of as an origin story as to why there are storms, why there's death, why women have painful childbirth. But at the same time, when did this punishment embody every other species in the world? And fucking hey, man, there's a bunch of questions I have about this that I do want to bring up. And all right, we'll just start off from here. I want to hear what your perspective is on Genesis.
So can you go back to the beginning of that timestamp? He says something that's super important that I want you to hear again.
Have to break his rules. And we don't want to worry about that because there aren't any consequences. Satan has said, don't let God jam you into some cramped existence.
This.
Constrict you from all of life's potentialities. You know what he's saying? Bottom line, God doesn't love you. God doesn't love you. I love you. I'm the one who loves you. I have your freedom in mind. I don't want to restrict you. Yeah, I heard that on the television the other night. Somebody was talking about...
So, before we go too far into Genesis, we have to talk about where Genesis even started, or why the Bible even started. So there was something called the Gnostic Tradition, which predates the Bible, essentially. And what predates that would be Egyptian mythology, right? So then you start to get this... let me look it up real quick to make sure I'm not misquoting myself. But there's a deity named name is Set or Seth, right? The sky god, the lord of the desert, master of storms, disorder, and warfare. In general, a trickster. So he's kind of like Loki from Norse mythology.
Okay.
Now that I've established who Set is, I need to establish some things about the commandments.
The commandments in the Bible are actually a derivative of the 42 principles of Maat, which is M-A-A-T. I'll pull this up on the video and after, but I'll look it up real quick because I don't have the shit memorized because it's not that important to me. But so the 42 principles is like, I have not committed sin, I have not committed robbery with violence, I have not stolen, I have not, you know what I'm saying? I have not, this one is super fucking cool. I have not closed my ears to truth. I have not falsely accused anyone. So it's like a bunch of things, right? And then if you distill that, then you can understand where the commandments came from. But back to Seth. So in the Bible, right, you have Jesus, and Jesus is always versus the devil, basically, and God versus the devil. But in the Egyptian mythology, you have Horus. So Jordan B. Peterson has this where he translates this Osiris story. I think he translates it a little too literally, but Osiris is murdered by Set. And Set, in this context, you can consider it your ego or your shadow, like inside of your mind, like that part of you, that darkness within you. So Horus is think of Hercules from Greek mythology, of like the hero story. So that's who Horus is. So Horus goes to like defeat Seth and avenge his father and like assume the kingdom, basically. So when you're talking, and I'm going to take this back to mental health, when and you were talking about your buddy that, you know, who ended up killing himself. Imagine the conversation that he was having in his mind, right?
Fucking hell.
He was fighting Set, right? He is Horus, right? And the Horus is the I. He is the awareness. He is the thing. But he's fighting Set. And Set, when you start to figure out who he is inside of you, right? He's the one he pretends to be shit, right? So then when he's telling you, when that dude was saying something about, I'm the one that loves you and this, that, and the other, people start to misconstrue some of these internal dialogues with negative things. So there's two voices that I found within myself, right? There's one that wants the best for me, and there's one that absolutely wants the worst.
Oh, and shit.
The trick is figuring out which one's which, because they sound exactly the same. They're both me, right? And the difference is like the decisions that they want me to make, right? There is a voice in my head that tells me, yeah, it'll be all right. Go smoke some meth. Like, nah, bro. Like, I'm chilling.
Yeah.
I'll be all right. You know what I mean? So I feel like it was a way to explain like very simple but complex like mental processes that people go through. And then in that video, when he starts talking about women specifically and being essentially blaming everything on Eve and this, that, and the other, and then just going down that train of thought. During the Crusades, they were putting out flyers and pamphlets of like the pagans being these demonic creatures that are like killing people and just doing all this fucking weirdo shit that was just like not true.
Yeah.
Right. So then you have this symbol of the pentagram, which is this star, this 5-pointed star, and it's upside down, right? And this symbol in pagan, in Wiccan, and like these old theologies, the symbol meant fertility. This was literally the symbol for women.
Oh.
So what they were doing was they were crusading against these pagans, and what the pagans truly believed was that the thing that evidenced God's existence the most was women. Because I hate to tell you this, bro, science hasn't got to the point where I can create a human, right? I'm not physically capable of giving birth.
Can't.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like that's kind of what their belief was, is that they were the connection to the divine. And then that pentagram further, because this is around the same time period of the Crusades against the Muslims. And who was it? The Knights Templar went to the Middle East and were doing all these crusades and shit. And then when they came back, they were bringing back with them certain Muslim principles or certain Islamic principles. So during the Spanish Inquisition, they were being tortured. And when they were being tortured, they were like, who do you worship and who do you pray to? And they all said a bunch of different things. Like, they all said different things during torture, because we all know that when you're being tortured, you'll say whatever the fuck you want, or whatever the person wants to stop you from being tortured.
Yeah, that's what happened.
So that's when the creature Baphomet, this dude, was created. So Baphomet he's got the head of a goat with the 5-pointed star in his head, and he's got horns. There's a moon in the background, and he's got wings. He's got titties, and then I can't remember what this thing is called, but it's this serpent entwined in a saber or a staff. It
looks like that medicine.
It is. It's that's exactly what it is. And then he's got, I can't remember, what is this? It's coagulate. Separate and join together, right? Binding and losing. Right. So he's got his hands raised and he has his other hand lowered. And there's something in like esoteric circles or spiritual circles that is, the saying is as above, so below. So anything that's outside, and then it's as without, so within, something like that. It's basically saying that everything is connected. It's the same on the outside as it is on the inside, right? It's just you have to figure out how. So separating and then joining things back together and figuring out what the fuck life actually is. But yeah, so these the initial video or the initial audio clip that you played when he's talking about Satan, that presupposes a lot of things for me, that Satan even exists. Well, what is Satan the embodiment of? Right? Satan's supposed to be the embodiment of evil. So there's a saying, and this is like this church that was trying to be for real, right? And he said, it says, Satan doesn't whisper, believe in me. He whispers, believe in yourself. Right? How is that bad? How is believing that I can do something bad, right? Inherently. Yeah. And what this is telling me, right? And this may not be all Christians and this may not be all religions, but at some point, like on some level, what this religion is telling me is that what it says goes and what I say doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how the fuck I feel. It doesn't matter anything about me. It's all about the objective reality. Fuck your subjective experience.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And a lot of the times, that's a feeling that I do get when I interact with a lot of these people in my class. Because one thing that they're always hammering on is if you sin, you're going to fucking hell. And that's as flat out as that. You can't do this, you can't do that, you can have sex before marriage, you can't. And then the guy kind of does this thing that I notice a lot of other people do. So they kind of beat the opposition to the argument. Like, they'll mockingly say, oh, well, if free will was so bad, how come people... You know what I mean? Like, they'll mockingly reiterate the things that people are going to use as counter-arguments. And for some reason, it just kind of seems to work. Like...
It's a very good rhetorical device, for sure.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, oh, some people will say that evolution... It's already kind of placing in people's mind that mocking personality that they should have when somebody brings up shit like evolution and stuff like that.
Well, that's perfect. That is exactly what I was talking about the objective versus subjective reality. Yeah. It's like this belief of, and I think we talked about it in our last podcast about whether kids are born embedded with information or if they're blank slates. So what this religion essentially is telling you is that you are born to be molded, right? You are born to do what the fuck we tell you to.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter anything about what you say or whatever. Fuck, I had a much more better point.
No, dude, you're on it. I think if I'm being completely honest, so far from what I've been studying, the Bible kind of seems to be kind of a model template for what you want a perfect citizen to be. Because a lot of times throughout history, especially reading Genesis, you realize if you sin, holy fuck, it's a big fucking deal. You know what I mean? Like, when you read Genesis and you read the first sin of man and how God reacts to it, no, dude doesn't just slap him on the wrist or say this, and that. No, dude fucking casts him out into the world, causes suffering. Guess what, bitch? You're the whole reason there's going to be natural storms, death, suffering. You're the reason why giving birth sucks. You know, it's a big deal. So it kind of embeds in people's minds already that if you sin, terrible things can happen to you as a result of your actions. And
well, let's let's go on that real quick.
Okay.
Because that's true, right? That's not a lie.
Yeah.
And how do you present the argument to somebody who doesn't really give a fuck, right? Like, if I told you that if you went to go cheat on your wife, the guilt eventually will fucking kill you.
Yeah. Yeah,
you know
for sure. Yeah, unless you're
like
a real
it will
piece of shit.
eventually it will kill. Even if you're a piece of shit, even if you don't outwardly show it, that stuff gets embedded on the back of your shadow, and then every relationship that you have after that, you begin to become paranoid, and you're afraid that that next girl is going to do the same thing that you did to other people. So then you start becoming worse and worse and worse, right? Or, I mean, any of those 12 commandments, any of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can objectively say that it wouldn't be, but why is it not bad? Why is it bad? Because at the end of the day, what this thing is telling you, what this belief system is telling you, is that the power of punishment is coming from outside of you instead of the truth of it, right? Is that it's within you. Because there's only one thing in my life that I know has witnessed everything that I've ever done, that can watch and knows, and it knows everything. Like, I can talk to you and I could tell you my whole life story, but you still wouldn't know. There's only one thing, and that's me. I know.
Yeah.
So that's Horus and Set, right? So that's Set in the back of your mind that's telling you, like, yo, you're a piece of shit, bro. You're a fucking piece of shit. And sometimes Set is not wrong.
No.
Sometimes he's right. And sometimes that little voice in the back of your head that's telling you you're a turd, it's like, all right, yeah, you're right. I gotta fucking sit down, and I gotta take a knee, drink water, face out, and I gotta reassess what the fuck is going on.
Dude, I'm glad you said that, because I really think a lot of people take this scripture too fucking literal, instead of diving a little deeper into the text and trying to figure out maybe there's something more to this than just for face value. You know what I mean? Because the way that guy talks, he talks as if it's a historical document. But the way you're kind of explaining, Set and Horus and stuff like that, you comparing it with the conflicts that we have within ourselves when we're making decisions. And the same thing goes. I don't think the Ten Commandments or the structure of Christianity is necessarily inherently bad. I think a lot of the things that they say is, in my opinion, I morally agree with a lot of the things that are there. Like, don't kill anybody. I guess adultery, I'm kind of loose with that. I don't really give a fuck. But what really bothers me isn't Christianity. It's the infiltration of evil within the church. And what do you mean? I wholesomely believe that there are very corrupt people who utilized religion as a tool for their own personal gain.
Well, I mean, that could be said about any institution.
But in a way
Christianity just has more power.
Exactly. In a way that cost thousands of lives, millions of lives, maybe even billions of lives over the course of history. The Crusades, fucking, when the conquistadors came to the North American continent and South American continent, and they began to spread Christianity. And if I'm being honest with you,
to be specific though, for clarity, to be specific, that's specifically Catholicism.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? So
yeah,
and I understand what you're saying, but some history buffs will be like, "That's fucking Catholic." Like, I get it, but the patch over. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. To Catholicism from Christianity isn't much, right? Yeah. There's not much of a difference, theologically speaking. There's some, like, I guess you would call them philosophical arguments that they disagree with about, like, prudence and some other fancy words that they use to explain certain topics that don't really mean much to the lay person. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No.
Continue.
No. But, it's just growing up Catholic, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because you're right. Catholicism is what I really have the most personal issues with, because I grew up Catholic.
So you're a recovering Catholic.
Yeah, I'm a recovering Catholic. I grew up my entire fucking life being told by my parents that gay people are bad. They're terrible people. They're going to hell. This and that. Yada yada. And
what generation is your parents?
My dad was born in the late 70s.
Would that be the boomer generation?
I I think so. Maybe.
Okay.
It might be shortly afterwards. I don't really know what the boomer generation, what the little parameters is. Yeah. So, but anyways, he was very religious, and every Sunday we were at church, this and that, the whole 9 yards. I got baptized, communion, this and that. But I would go home, and behind closed doors, after he just preached love, support, and all these great things that he should embody, he's talking very terribly about people like that. And even at a young age, I thinking to myself, I don't want to hate somebody because they're gay. And he was very open about, well, if you ever became gay, I'll tie you to a fucking table until you turn straight. And, you know, some very extreme things that to me didn't make sense.
Because that would work.
Yeah, exactly. Like some shit that to me didn't make sense. Yeah. And the older I got, the more I realized that, you know what? This is wrong. And when I started meeting gay people, and I've met some really fucking awesome, nice gay people, in my mind, the first thing that came to my head is, you know what? I don't think you deserve to go to hell, and I don't think you should go to hell. And you know what? I'm going to take this a step further. I feel like, you know, when I hold on to that belief of God really strongly at a younger age, I don't believe my God is going to send you to hell for being gay and for being who you are. I don't.
Facts.
And that's when now I can realize that it's kind of a unique process and a very difficult process, because in order for something like that to happen, you have to challenge your ideas. And I grew up in an environment where I really, like a lot of other people on this world, have no real choice in the culture they're born in, the society they're born in, the way of thinking. Essentially, up until a certain point in your life, you decide to challenge those beliefs. You are the environment. Yeah, exactly.
You're getting programmed into whatever you're born into.
Exactly. And that was me. And it was a very rough fucking, you know, when I was an adolescent, it was really rough. I was, you know, I was lashing out at my dad because he was saying all this crazy shit. And then he was lashing out at me because, you know, he used to think that, like, Harry Potter was a devil. And I was reading Harry Potter books because it was, like, because it was about fucking magic. He was like, you're reading about fucking witches and warlords.
My great-grandmother, when Pokemon first came out, I had a bunch of Pokemon cards, and she said that shit was the devil, too. I love her to death, but...
It's lack of understanding. And that's why...
It's built into that system. So, going back to what we were talking about before, I want to, like, put a pin in something and just remind me evolution is what I wanted to talk about. But when you're talking about the obedience thing and listening to me because I'm what's right and I'm the one that's saying shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's built into that system. So when you as a child are rebelling against these things because you're born and you kind of see like, yo, I shouldn't hate these people just because they're different, right? Because that's essentially what you were growing up into, and you were rebelling against something that you knew was wrong. And that's at the end of the day, that is the most honorable thing that we can do as a human being. That's what America was founded on. Yeah. Right. Was fighting back against unjust laws. Right. That is like the underpinning of what justice is. Like if we have laws that we think are just, well, we should follow them. Right. But if there is any law that is unjust, it goes without saying that they should not be followed. Right. That's the basis there. No, going back to that evolutionary thing. Earlier we were talking and I had forgotten my point, but now I'm remembering.
I remember.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So when these children are being blank slates, right, the only way to program them is essentially from the outside, is what Christianity is basically telling. And any rebellion of that is just something to be beaten down. But evolution, this is why Christians have such a hard time, or that. So the basis of all that type of religion is, it's called Zoroastrianism, and it's also Gnostic. It's essentially a duality of good and evil. That's like that. across all of those religions, those theologies, Islam too. So when they have an issue with evolution, what they're basically saying, right, without saying it, is that you are stuck being who you were born as, and you cannot change. And I personally have a huge issue with people who say shit like that, because growing up, right, I was a meth addict from the time I was 13 till I was 18, right? I went through a real, I wouldn't say rough because I'm the one that chose it, but it wasn't easy to get out of meth. But if I had held this belief that I can't change, what do you think I would be right now?
Fucking
you know what
meth
I'm saying?
head. You'd probably be dead.
I'd be dead, right? So it's, and then in our first podcast, I was talking about that old adage of the snake and the knife, and how the snake constricts onto the knife because it's the thing that's hurting it, not realizing it's the thing that's going to kill it. And if it had just let go of this, right? So when we're talking about Christianity, that's one of those beliefs that I'm kind of trying to port over. So if you're believing that nothing can change and things are just this way, you're never going to grow. You're never going to get better. Like you're going to be stuck in this modality, this thought pattern, and you're putting yourself in a prison. So when he was talking on your video and he said God restricts you, 100%, 100%, that belief restricts you into this thing. So then going back again, right, to that audio clip that you said, or you showed. So I'm going to port in some Gnosticism here and some spirituality. So you have these concepts, right? So if you took humans, right, and you split them into two, right? And people are having this huge argument about gender, and I'm not talking about gender specifically. What I'm talking about is the way that these things present. One of them is either masculine or feminine, or some combination of both. But you can make a bifurcation between masculine and feminine, right? So that's what we're talking about right now. So masculine, anything that you can say to be masculine can be synonymous with the terms form and structure. So with a computer, the box, the casing in which the computer is the pieces are being held, that would be masculine. But then the motherboard and the GPU and all of that stuff would be feminine in relation to the larger form. So now you're talking about some engineering principles with what's called a work breakdown structure and a bill of materials. So you have form, fit, and function. So with the case and those pieces, it's masculine and feminine. But then when you get into those pieces, that becomes the end item on that bill of materials, which would be the form, right? But then the function, right, which would be feminine, would be the software and the things that are inside of it. So when you're talking about this, you can essentially draw a square, right? And Da Vinci's like the man thing where he's like got his arms spread and his legs on the bottom. There's squares and circles. That's masculine is the square and feminine is the circle. Oh, right. I didn't know that. So then you can start talking about Fibonacci, which is you have the Fibonacci spiral and then you have the Fibonacci square. The Fibonacci square is masculine. The Fibonacci spiral is feminine. But when you let's make that into something, right? That's just a geometry. So you have this line would be, pick a science, any science, it doesn't matter.
Physics.
So you have physics is this line, and then name another science within physics.
Chemistry. Oh, within physics, fucking thermodynamics.
Then it comes down, right? It comes down into it can be subsumed by physics, but it's in here. So then there's some other topic within thermodynamics, and it would be like this, and it would be a Fibonacci square as it goes down, right? But then the spiral is like the information, right? The main concepts, right? Within thermodynamics specifically, you have the second rule, which basically is information can never be destroyed. It can just be changed. Yeah. So, and that's when you're coming out of the spiral back up to the main topic, which is these are the things that you can extract and talk about the universe and whatever. So that's the basic concepts of like spirituality and sacred geometry, which we can go into in depth another day. But specifically back to the feminine piece of this, right? So Christianity focuses Like even the God of Christianity and the Zoroastrian religions is masculine. It is a masculine God. So if you draw this, right, you put a boundary, right, in your mind of a square. What that boundary is representative of time, right? Because what is outside of time, right? Reality is bounded to time. There is nothing that exists outside of time that we can understand or that we do understand. Yeah. So there's a lot of theories and a lot of evidence that the God of main Christianity is actually Kronos, and the Christianity is a Chronite cult, is what they would call it.
Yeah.
So then when you're talking about feminine in this Gnostic tradition, you start to talk about Lilith and Sophia. And Sophia in the Gnostic tradition is synonymous with wisdom and intelligence and this, that, and the other. And it's inside of the masculine structure. But
yeah.
Have you ever heard the concept that if God was real, God would be a woman?
No, I haven't, but hey, break it down.
So imagine anything in life that is not born. Even the concept of inventing something is a feminine act because you are creating. Like the creation is a feminine act. Does that make sense? So you have this God structure that is ruling the universe, this masculine structure. It is born of something. Every religion has this feminine figure above it that is creating the masculine structure that in which we live, right? So then you start talking about it's Aeon in Greek, and I can't remember what it is in Egyptian mythology, but it's a female. So then it's creating everything within it. So, and then you go inside of the masculine again, and it's feminine. And then inside of the feminine, it becomes masculine again, because then you start creating hard structures like automobiles and other forms, and then functions, and then forms, and then functions within itself. And it just goes on forever that way, right? Even the way you talk about cells and atoms, right? Depending on the context, this is what I was talking about before, like with the gun, the ground, and the target, depending on the context of the form in which you're talking about, the form would be masculine when you're talking about, an atom specifically, but then within an atom, you have like electrons, all that shit. Yeah. That would be the feminine relative to the masculine form above it. But you can flip it and be talking about the electrons specifically, and then that would be the masculine structure that you're talking about, and then the feminine. So these things are a duality in themselves, right? You can't have one without the other. It doesn't work. Right?
You know, that's such a huge thing that I've been thinking about too. I'm telling you, bro, fucking a huge discussion for me is you can't exist without coexisting. And I wholesomely believe that. I really do believe you cannot exist without coexisting. So it is very hard for me to believe that God was a singular being at the beginning of time, or at the beginning of all of existence. That's my biggest problem. Because you cannot exist without coexisting. In my opinion, there always has to be a point of reference. It always has to be relative to something. So the thing about Lucifer is that he came before the fall of man. He was already there when Adam and Eve were in the Garden of Eden. So prior to this, he was supposedly an angel. Not only that, he was an archangel. And on top of that, he was essentially God's favorite angel, according to the stories. He was the messenger of God. He was the closest to God. And if it was anybody who would challenge his reign and wanted to understand what God did and how he could do it better, it would end up being Lucifer. So that tells me, number one, at the beginning of time when mankind was first created out of nothing, Lucifer had already existed. Not only that, but bad has already been existent. So before mankind, according to these stories, it wasn't all good. As a matter of fact, not everything occurred, not sin, not these terrible ideas, not corruption, evil. None of that was created out of mankind's decision to eat from the tree. And in my opinion, it's not mankind's fault, because a lot of the times people utilize this event as a method of explaining human nature, that it is human nature before the fall of God to be in the image of God, to be all good, to be as God, but without the authority
See, I
of
reject that entire premise. Because they're essentially saying it's all women's fault.
Yeah, that
there
too.
is no fault on the man. I reject the entire premise.
That too, because it's one of the biggest things that Christianity also explains is that it is a woman's job to be. Well, which I guess I kind of don't disagree, because motherhood and stuff like that. It is a woman's job to kind of do the nurturing, be supportive, and if she has any questions, she has to go to the man for confirmation, and the man is kind of the authoritative figure. And the way Genesis is written, the reason I'm harping on Genesis, because that's a lot of that ties into with kind of making women being lesser than men, 100%. And this is where I kind of start seeing where I believe mankind has kind of manipulated the literature of the Bible to kind of conform to their ideas. And a lot of that is because they wanted women to not necessarily feel like they're lesser than men, but kind of to give a divine right as to why they should be lesser than men. So to kind of provide more comfort and for them to conform to their society, where their society expects them to stay home, not work, make food for the man, and take care of the children, and get fucked by the dad, and that's all. That's pretty much it. And
what? So
sorry.
let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. Back in the day, right, with these pagans, we consider, a lot of Christians, what they consider it is that they were performing magic, right? And that's where Wiccans come, and it's a mainly feminine dynamic. But Aleister Crowley is a really prolific occult writer, and he talks about magic, but he uses the K to separate it from just ordinary magic or whatever. And if you read his books and you understand what he's talking about, he's actually talking about emotions. So you go to talk about the Salem witch trials, right, where these Orthodox Christians were burning women at the stake. What do you think was this is my question. What do you think was actually happening? Because I know a lot of dudes, right? And most of the dudes I know have a hard time expressing their feelings or even understanding what it is that they are feeling. So now imagine for a moment, you got this girl who's smart as fuck, who knows what the fuck she's feeling, and is very in touch with her emotions, which would be feminine because it's endosomatic. It's within you, right? That is a feminine structure. Emotions are feminine, right? The body itself is a masculine structure. But so these women are very good at it. And then they were making these dudes feel shit. Like, oh, this bitch made me feel some shit. That's a witch. Fucking burn her. That bitch didn't let me fuck. Burn her. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's exactly. And then we're talking about how it was making them less than. There's this. So when it comes to, what is that shit called? Women take it, birth control, right? When you're taking birth control pills, right? There's a disorder that you can develop from taking birth control, and it's called amenorrhea. Right?
No, I didn't know that.
It's like uncontrollable bleeding or something to do with bleeding specifically. But when you look at this word, are you still looking at my screen?
Yeah.
Just look at the spelling of this word. So you have amen or Rhea. So amen, you know what amen means, but Rhea is the mother of the gods and the goddess of feminine fertility, motherhood, and generation. She's essentially the goddess of like chaos type of shit, right? When you hear about Rhea, she's always tied to chaos. So that's a very interesting thing when you're talking about this disease, amenorrhea, and it's directly tied to birth control, and then the birth control is directly tied to trying to manage a woman's hormones so that she doesn't get PMS. Because when when a woman is bleeding or whatever, her body goes through hormonal changes and she gets fucking irritated. I would be pissed if I bled for 5 fucking days.
Me too.
You know what I mean?
Fucking A.
Right? So
Yeah.
it just goes back to trying to control just natural subjective experiences because they didn't want to deal with whatever the fuck was coming out.
Yeah.
Right. Instead of trying to learn and this, that, and the other. And the thing that I always like to think about is like, what do I want for my daughter? So I was talking to somebody at work the other day who grew up Catholic like you, right? She's a recovering Catholic. And she was describing to me the structure and the structure and the discipline that she grew up in, right? Structure and discipline is not bad. It's just it needs to be utilized in the right way, right? And then the question becomes, what's the right way? So essentially, her uncle and her father were having this conversation, and it was about the children. And the uncle wanted his sons all to go to college and go get jobs and get trades and learn and do all this so they can become something of themselves. Yeah. And then when the father asked his brother, what about your daughters? He was like, I don't give a fuck. They're just going to get married and get taken care of by some man anyway. So that's the idea. Right. And then when we were having these women's rights movements and we're still having this. So when feminists are talking about we don't have the same, it's really a rebel for me. Right. This doesn't mean that's what it is. But for me, it's like a rebellion against these patriarchal institutions that people are trying to pretend like they're not patriarchal. It's like, what? No, that it's written in the books, in the bylaws, like it's written deep inside of that shit to be that women are subjugated under a man's rule. Like I think it's in Deuteronomy, it says that a woman can be sold to a rapist. Oh my! But then you can talk about, but then these theologians, right? And I've gotten in arguments with these dudes who like literally have degrees in theology, and they start telling you that you need to have the word is exegesis. And you need to have proper I will show you what this word means, my guy.
What the fuck does it mean?
Exegesis means legitimate interpretation, what the original author or authors meant to convey. So what they're trying to say is that without proper exegesis, you don't understand what the Bible is actually meaning. So when you read it yourself, you as the layperson cannot understand what God is saying. But me as the expert, right, I know what God was saying. I know.
Pastors.
And then this other word, it's like eisegesis. I can't pronounce it. It's eisegessis. Is when the interpreter wishes to find or thinks he finds and it's essentially saying that you're projecting your own subjective ideas, not the meaning of what's in the text. Which is a very interesting distinction for me, because how do you read something objectively without yourself in it? There is no time in which I am unaware of what it is that I'm doing. That's the only way to be objective about anything. You can't do that. And then physics, right? And this is the difference. So between science and religion, right? Special relativity, the observer directly impacts what the observed, right? What is that experiment called?
The observer effect. So the observer effect is when people are analyzing photons. So essentially what they'll take a photometer, and what the way they analyze is when these photons are not being observed, they behave as waveforms. So when you look at the photometer readings, you can see that it had collected the photons in sporadic oscillating patterns, which means that the photons were behaving in a waveform manner. But the moment that these photons are being observed, they behave as particles, meaning that after they are being observed, these photons that are collected by the photometer reproduce a reading where it is consistent with the shape of the two slits that they are passing through. So essentially, you cut two slits and you shoot photons through the two slits, and then you collect the data to see how these photons are acting. So if you look up the observer effect, you can actually, Danny, can you pull that up? That way we can show these guys. So that's pretty much what I was explaining. So before they're being observed, they're spread out over space and time, which means that they are kind of corresponding with the oscillation. So that means that as they're not being observed, they're acting kind of sporadic. So when you are actually observing it, and these photons somehow can determine that they're being observed, you can see that there is a predictable measurement of the photons. So there are two slits. As you are shining a light through two slits, you expect there to be two slits, obviously. Same thing as when you see shadows. When you see a shadow in front of a light, you can see the silhouette behind it. But when the detection is turned off, you can see on the right-hand side that it acts in an oscillating manner where it's not necessarily conforming to the two slits. It is actually being observed as a waveform that is oscillating up and down. And that is what the observer essentially is. It pretty much changes the behavior of the photons. And that just, to me, when I first read about it and before I became familiar with it, it just kind of blew my mind knowing that these photons understand, well, I don't know if understands the right word, but they know when they're being observed and when they're not being observed. And based on that variable alone, they act differently.
Okay, so the observer effect is basically telling us that we either impact our the objective reality as we would understand it to be, or we don't fully, and we will never be able to fully understand what the objective reality is. So the only thing that we can truly map is our subjective experience that we have. So when we're talking about the observer effect, right, and we're talking about it in relation to this exegesis, you can't remove yourself, right? The observer cannot be removed from the equation. So the moment it's observed, it becomes different. No matter how hard you try, you cannot stop from projecting your subjective experience onto whatever it is. So I don't even think exegesis is physically possible.
Before I move on from Genesis, there are a few things I do want to talk about, though. And one of them being human nature, for sure.
Okay.
So before we move on to human nature, though, there are certain things that don't make necessarily sense to me. Maybe you guys can help bring insight into this also, because one of the biggest things about Genesis that also didn't make sense with me was the fact that there was a tree of knowledge of good and evil. First of all, why is that there? I don't exactly understand why that was there in the first place. What was the purpose for it? In my opinion, everything has a role to play during its existence. You know, nothing is just made for no reason whatsoever. Everybody has a purpose. Everything has a purpose. We live in very delicate environments where every living organism contributes to the ecosystem. And the same, I think that tree is no exception either. Even though they weren't allowed to eat from that tree, the tree bears fruit, regardless of whether or not people say that this may be bullshit. But I think that eventually, maybe if Adam and Eve didn't eat from the tree that bears fruit was going to drop seeds, because that's essentially what a fruit is. A fruit is a body that essentially carries seeds in order for it to reproduce. There are two fundamental things for living organisms. I believe that living organisms are either one or the other. One, they either adapt to survive and retain their species alive through that manner, or two, they reproduce in order to allow their species to survive. So if you don't fucking live forever like these microorganisms that live millions of fucking years or thousands of years, I don't really know too much about them, but I understand that they can withstand extreme conditions, or you either reproduce like we normally do, like mammals do. We essentially survive and our species remains existent because we reproduce and we create numbers. And that's how we're still able to be here today. So let's say if a fruit was to be reproduced from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, would that be something that they wouldn't necessarily be allowed to eat from? Because God specifically said, you can't eat from this tree, but if that tree reproduces and creates other trees around it, because it's bound to happen because it bears fruit, would that still kind of be something that he wouldn't want them to eat from. And I see a lot of these issues in Genesis or stories from the Bible that don't really make logical sense to me. And I know I mentioned earlier about Lucifer being already there, you know, like if God created the world from nothing, you know, like 7 days, you know, and then the seventh day he rested, and then he grabbed dust, breathed air into man, and that's how he created man. And from man he created woman. Why is it that before the existence of everything, there is already this being you've already casted out of heaven? And not only that, but you casted 1/3 of the angels out of heaven too, because they disobeyed. Disobeyed you, and they wanted to take your position as God. And it's a lot of these things that make me question why this is a story that, in my opinion, this is not a story that people can logically make sense of and choose to follow. This is a story, and the Bible itself is sort of a template for people to teach or... Hold on, I'm fucking losing my fucking words, bro. But essentially, I think the Bible was created to mold people to be not perfect citizens, but the ideal citizen to be controlled. Because nobody else is going to fucking believe this shit unless they're being told and influenced by the people around them.
So I have to push back on that specifically, because I don't get me wrong, I get off on a good old Christian bash conversation, but I don't think it was necessarily created to control. I think it was used that way. I don't think its utility was that originally, right? Because we were talking about we were talking about earlier. It essentially is a template for good, quote unquote, citizens, right? How do you create a macro for all these basically murderous people who are following their lower dimensional needs, right? Like sex and food and shelter and all that stuff. How do you get them to all work together? Well, you give them something outside of themselves to go for. And you see that still today in the army, in prisons and education. That's basically what we try to do.
Oh, so build communities and societies and okay, I can understand that part.
So then back to one of your first statements about the tree of good and evil and reproduction specifically. So you had told a story about your father, and I'd asked you if he was a boomer. And the reason I asked that was because a boomer is a baby boomer. And the reason why I believe personally that they have this mental schema, which is this construct in their mind where lesbians and homosexual males are evil, quote unquote, is because they lack the ability to reproduce. That's the only difference. That is literally the only difference between a homosexual and a heterosexual.
Yeah.
Is the ability to reproduce intrinsically within the communion between those two people. So this religion wanted more people. It's like, if you think about it, and this, I don't mean this in a negative way, but if you think about it as like a virus, right? A virus's purpose is to duplicate. A virus is not alive. A virus does not have any emotions. It's just, its entire purpose is to duplicate itself so that it can fucking spread. So when you're talking about Christianity or this Zoroastrian, this belief system, its entire job is to spread to more people, to concentrate attention into one direction. Now that in and of itself is not a bad thing. Yeah. But it's, what direction is that attention going? Like what are we doing? Because you start talking about the Nazis, they did the same thing, but they used it in a very, very bad way. Yeah. They did the exact same thing. And you had said something else, and I kind of forgot what it was, but I wanted to go that way too.
I mean, another topic I wanted to talk about too was free will. A lot of the times that guy hammered on free will. He thought that, he constantly mocked somebody's idea that God, believing in God, is restraining goodwill. I mean, not goodwill, free will. And you agreed with that, right?
Well, this is where you get into what's called cognitive dissonance. So cognitive dissonance is like you hold. So I think I have to explain what a schema is. A schema is like a mental image that you have in your head, a picture, a structure. It's like programming language, right? It's a bunch of conditions. It's an operating system almost. So you have this schema of this belief, and then there's information that come in that contradict some of the supplemental reasons why you believe this, and you have dissonance. And another word for dissonance could be friction or resistance. And you don't want to change your belief because of some feeling it would cause to you. So you reject this new information, whether it's true or not.
Yeah.
Just because you want to protect your internal feelings.
Beliefs. Yeah.
So what did you say that prompted that? Sorry, I got a little too far into that.
No, you're good. I was
free
asking.
Free will.
Yeah.
So in a lot of these arguments with theologians or whatever, they start talking about this concept of free will, but then there's other. So what is free will? It's my ability to choose.
Yeah,
right? I can choose whatever the fuck I want. So when I'm choosing whatever I want, does that necessarily mean that God isn't in control of my choices, but he's telling me what the right thing to do is? And if I don't make the right choice, he's not going to accept me. So do I actually have free will? I mean, I get it, there's like this weird friction there that doesn't truly make sense, because when you're talking about sin and whether or not we're pre-programmed to be sinful, then where does my free will come in that conversation? And then they make up all these additional ideas to explain that, but it's not comprehensive. So when you were talking earlier, I remembered what it was, and you were talking about the genesis in this, the entire concept. So I want you to go a little metacognitive, right? Pull yourself out of Genesis and look at it as a whole. It's a story of the beginning, right?
Yeah.
And these people don't fully understand what the beginning is.
Yeah.
So keep that idea separate, right? That's a strategic level, right? And we talked about the levels of leadership. Think about it as like a viewing of one-to-one objects. So you're talking about this as a strategic level thing. Now think about a child, right? You have a child, and I was walking my daughter during a thunderstorm the other night, and I was looking up at this lightning in this fucking cloud. And Alan Watts has this saying where he says the goal of life is essentially to see the world through the eyes of a child when you get older, because when your child is growing up, everything is new and everything is fucking amazing.
Yeah.
Right. So when I was looking at this lightning, I was like, well, what if I was just some random fuck in the middle of the woods and I was raising kids, right?
Yeah.
How would I? And I didn't know shit about shit.
Yeah.
I just knew how to live. I knew how to eat and survive. How would I explain to my kids what the fuck that thunder was?
Yeah.
What that lightning was?
Yeah.
So then you start getting these stories of like, there's a parallel in Egypt to Thor, but the Thor is the thunder and the lightning god. So when you're talking about Genesis and why it's so logically inconsistent, is because they're trying to build something from nothing, and that's almost impossible to do cleanly. Right, you're literally building it from nothing, but you have a good idea in the middle, and the good idea in the middle is getting people to behave good to each other. Right, that's the baseline of Christianity: is do unto others as you want to do to yourself. That's the golden rule. That's a good fucking rule.
Yeah, I agree.
Right? That's not a bad rule. But then you get this weird tribalistic distinction of, if you don't believe what I believe, you're evil. If you don't believe what I believe, you're evil. If you're different than me, you're evil. If you know what I'm saying? So like that's the dissonance that I'm talking about, because some of these things that are programmed into the Bible about, kids being rebellious is something to be beaten out of them, right? That's not necessarily true, because then we would still have things like slavery if we didn't rebel against the status quo. And in the Bible, slavery was a practice. Jesus said slaves should be good to their masters, basically.
Fucking A.
It's something. Don't quote me on that. It's something similar. It's along those lines. It's along those lines.
I think so. I think you're right.
I think pretty much what I'm trying to get at is that I believe free will is good. I think knowledge is good, and I think having the ability to choose and kind of develop your own sense of what's right or wrong is good. Now, I do have a question. Danley or Juan, how do you determine what's morally right or wrong?
I guess in a short way of thinking about it, like right away, is I would say, I guess, social norms to an extent. And you could say social norms are kind of based off of essentially religion, to be honest, when you really think about it.
Okay. What about you, Dan? Oh, sorry. Keep going.
Like, think of like obviously, like, I grew up and my parents are religious, right? Even though I'm not, but think of like everybody bases like what not to do off of like I grew up Catholic or whatever, so like commandments, right? Don't kill people, don't fucking steal, blah blah blah, all that bullshit. Yeah. But like to an extent, like obviously everything is subjective, but like what is it in us that makes us like not want to fucking kill your mom or like, yeah, you know, when you're born, shit like that. So that, I guess that's a greater question to think about it. But yeah, social norms, I guess.
Okay. What about?
So what's the question again, so I can be clear?
How do you determine what is morally right from wrong?
Experience. In a short answer. A long form of that is, so in therapy and certain psychological practices, there's something called a biopsychosocial. And that is essentially determining everything about a human and why its behavior is what it is. So bio would be synonymous with genetic predeterminism. Psycho is essentially the rationale or the cognitions that you're using. And social is social determinism. So you are the 5 people that you spend the most time with, basically. Okay. And I think it's a combination of all 3 of those. Because you can say that if you're born with some developmental disorder, that's how you're going to be. And you can say that if you're born into a certain religious structure, that's how you're going to be. And you can say that if you're born and you believe certain things, you're going to be these certain things. So when you're talking about a moral right and wrong, like at one point in my life, I thought it was okay to do drugs, do meth. You know what I mean? And there was other times where I thought it was okay to just beat the shit out of people when they talk shit to me. And there's certain things in that unless, so you were talking about something called a for loop, right? Where unless you set a condition, you'll get stuck in this loop. So what essentially Christianity was trying to do was create a macro so that nobody ever gets stuck in that loop. And if there is a loop, it's at least a positive loop, right? Okay. You're stuck in this, I can't murder, I can't do this, I can't do that. And that in and of itself is okay, but it brings with it some issues. So what I feel like the moral, some moral belief or whatever, I can take it always back to myself. Do I want to fucking die? No. Yeah. So I don't think I should be able to kill anybody. Now that there's a caveat there, right? And this is where, you know, my infantry training and whatever else that I've done is that sometimes people make decisions that take away every option that I have to make the scenario safe for everybody involved. Like if your biopsychosocial essentially developed you or programmed you to believe that it's okay to like murder a fucking school of kids, right? And I come up into the situation, you already have a gun, you're already pointing the gun. There's nothing I can do other than kill you to save those people. Yeah. So that's the caveat to where murder is okay. But at the end of the day, it's still not okay. It's just okay relative to the context of the situation. Because I'm still going to feel something about killing this dude. And some people say, you shouldn't care and this, that, and the other. But when you think about it at the end of the day, I still ended this kid's life. And then when you start adding in, this is where I think knowledge of good and evil, right, is what is evil other than a conglomeration of a bunch of extremely bad events. Because I personally don't believe anybody is born evil. I think they're created. I agree. You know what I mean? And you can say that these kids are develop these patterns of behavior from an early age because of certain social constructs that they were born into or certain genetic defects that they have or whatever, what have you. But I don't think that means inherently that this kid is fucking evil. I can't look at a baby and say that ever. I can look at an adult and be like, yeah, he's evil. But then in the context of that, you can't say that either because there's a reason why. Right. Evil presupposes that there is no good in this person and his subjective experience and his reality. Whatever he's doing is good. He has a reason. He has a justification. Yeah. Most of the time, unless you're talking about like a sociopath like the Joker. But even then, he thinks what he's doing is good, even if he says that he knows it's bad.
Yeah, because he like, I guess even when you think of like his like newer movie, because what do they make it like when they try to make a villain look good? like an anti-villain or whatever.
Yeah.
Like they make you side with him, right? So like even with that, like that being like his morals are like you stand with him in that movie. So like it's subjective, obviously.
Oh, for sure. And then,
Yep.
So when you're talking about Christianity talks about you can't have any morality without there being, it presupposes the existence of some God or some thing outside of you, which I can understand the concept, but I'm not going to personify it, right? I'm not going to personify this objective reality as some masculine parental cosmic figure, right? I can say that between me, you, and fucking Juan here, we come up with some ideal between the three of us. That is objective reality. That includes all three of our subjective realities, which at the end of the day would be a democracy. So we vote for what's best for us, and we're trying to be inclusive to all of us. That would be my understanding of moral morality, basically.
Yeah. No, I agree. Yeah. I think the way at least I answered it when they asked me was exactly the same way that literally, almost line for line, because the idea was behind without any God there is no moral right or wrong. So it's that what bothers me isn't necessarily what people say to me. It's me trying to understand their mindset. So if they're dealing in absolutes, for an example, I can't stand absolutes. Like somebody tells me you're wrong without really fully going into the details as to why I may be wrong or what the possibilities of me being wrong are. They're just flat out, yep, you don't conform to my ideas, you're wrong, period, end of discussion, bye. I guess it's kind of triggering to me when somebody just flat out says, yeah, without God, there is no moral right or wrong. And then they after watching the video that pretty much tells me that, they ask me in the test, how do you determine what's morally right from wrong? And you were a lot quicker at answering it than I was. It took me maybe like 30 minutes or 40 minutes of me just thinking like, God damn, how do I determine what's morally right or wrong? And then eventually I came to the same conclusion where, like, you know what? I don't do shit to people because I don't like when that shit's done to me. I don't think killing people is okay because of the pain and suffering. You know, we've all had family members that have died, and we understand that the amount of pain that a family experiences when somebody dies is not a good feeling. It's not good. And I don't want to inflict those feelings onto somebody. Growing up as a kid, you get into fights and shit like that. You don't like being hit. You don't like it when somebody steals your shit, especially if, for example, when you work hard for your shit as an adult, somebody breaks in your house and steals your stuff. You hate it. It's such a shitty feeling knowing that somebody stole your hard work. So when you're in a situation where you have the ability to, for example, steal somebody's wallet that they dropped on the floor, you remember that feeling of what it was like to be the person who got the shit stolen from them. And that's how over time I managed to create my morals right from wrong, was for my own personal experiences of either because I personally experienced it or because I can imagine the amount of pain or the amount of suffering, or I can sort of put myself in somebody else's shoes and understand why I shouldn't do these terrible things to them, or these, even if they're like something as simple as me fucking, I don't want to throw a rock at somebody's window because I know personally if somebody threw a rock at my window and it broke, I've got to go through all this shit. I got to go through my insurance company, this and that, blah, blah, blah. Maybe I don't have insurance. I over time, I just started relating all of these decisions I make to how would I feel if I was that person. And that's essentially what I boiled my answer down to. I was like, hey, I determine what's morally right from wrong from the experiences that I have growing up. Because I know what that person is going to have to go through if I commit these actions.
True. Yeah, I agree.
If you distill that, though, what is it actually that's teaching you? And it's your feelings and your emotions.
Yeah.
That's the basis of all of that. And the issue that I have a lot of the time is that everything that you said can be true, but then you have the people who, you basically described empathy, and then you have people who lack empathy or lack this connection to an outside person. But then the question becomes, how did they develop this lack of empathy? Right.
That's a good question.
And for me, it goes back to that biopsychosocial, right?
Mm-hmm.
Were they born with a lack of empathy? Because I think that happens in certain adjustment disorders or certain developmental disorders, but it's not as consistent or as much as people like to believe. What more likely happened, right, is you had a family raise this child and didn't think about the needs of the child first. The child was not put on basically like that Eddie Murphy movie back in the day, The Golden Child.
Yeah.
We didn't put the child on this pedestal where his feelings and its feelings or her feelings matter more than mine. Because the kid is going to have his own perception of reality. Now, whether or not it's actually what happened is immaterial, because what it's doing is it's telling the kid this is real, and no matter what I say to him or her, they're still going to feel that. Like, I'm not in there with them. Right? Their set is telling them what it is. So I have to help develop an understanding of what these emotions are. So, for instance, my son and my daughter will both have huge, blow up meltdowns, but it's relative based on their day or whatever it is that they're going through at the time, because you have to remember that they're going through like developmental stages of a human. Mm-hmm. So you have a baby who's just learning how to control this fucking meat sack that we live in, who's Pickle Rick basically building limbs. And then once you've developed this, right, there's this concept of like the human body is able to do complex physics within moments. Like, how do you know how to throw a baseball and hit 100 meters away? Mm-hmm. How do we actually know how to do that's complex physics between deciding to do it, getting the muscle to do it, and actually doing the motion. So then you have from there, that's just the physicality. So that's the masculine portion of this. The feminine portion of this is you have emotions that are dictating the way that you interact with reality. So when you have this Christian dogma of like, I'm going to tell you what it is and fuck your feelings, it doesn't matter, blah, 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 you're essentially teaching these people to repress these things. And through going through therapy and this, that, and the other, and I said it in our last podcast, what happens with men specifically is that we get taught to repress our feelings and to think about everything logically. And it's become like a staple of masculinity to say, I don't incorporate my emotions, right? I can see things without using my emotions. Well, you're completely missing half of the equation of life then. The half of the equation of life is how you feel about it. So you just want to live your life, and if I make $1 million, fuck if I'm just miserable my entire life. That's why even live. At that point, like, why even live? So that doesn't make sense if you take it to that extreme. So you come back to like the Planck scale of like a moment to moment basis. Like, why are you doing anything that you're doing if not to make yourself feel good? Then you start coming on to this hedonistic principles of like, well, if it feels good, fucking do it. Well, okay, hold on. So what's the difference between children and adults? At the end of the day, it's one thing that makes the difference, and it's time. It's experience. It's exposure to experiences. So my 6-year-old has less exposure to experiences than my 10-year-old. Mm-hmm. And they both have less experiences than I do. So at the end of the day, what we're trying to teach them is like, hey, your actions have ripple effects into the future. You're trying to show them this concept of time that they only can reference 6 years of. They only have a reference page of 6 years. But then that goes back to this question of when is your first fucking memory? Because my first memory wasn't until I was like 2 or 3. And then the question is whether or not I've made up that memory, because you can't really ever fully see it.
If you can actually remember it.
So then you have only 4 years of relative experience to base your decisions off of. So what we're trying to teach them is like, hey, time is real. This other stuff happens. And they're like, I don't give a fuck. I don't give a shit. So you have to live moment to moment with these kids. And Christianity basically is saying that all kids are the same. All kids are, whoop to whoop and yada yada. It's just an even slate. But when you talk about your cousins or your little brother and your little sister, they have different personalities. And that's not just strictly because their experiences were different. Like the timeline that they lived on was different. It's because they were born different. they came embedded with something, and they're trying to figure out who they are. So my job as a parent, is specifically a father, is to remove obstacles from my children's path that stop them or hinder them from being the best them that they can be. Because I can only imagine, right, having a child who's homosexual, and then me telling my child that if you're gay, I'm going to tie you to a fucking table and beat you until you're not gay.
Yep.
So now he has this schema of his father, which in the mind of a child, I'm a god. And I'm going to do a little anecdotal experience that I just had over this weekend, which blew my fucking mind. I was in bed. I was putting my son to bed, and he's exactly like me, so he's a little shit. And he's like punching me in the side, right? He's just hitting me like this. And I was like, "Hey, bud, why are you punching me? I don't want to be punched." He's like, "It's not like it hurts." I was like, "How do you know?" And he's like, "Well, you've fallen off a 20-foot cliff and didn't get hurt, so this isn't going to hurt you." So there was a time in the Army where I fell off a cliff during nods, and like I told him the story one time, and not thinking anything of it, but he internalized that story to then look at me like some type of fucking superhero that I just don't get hurt. So now the way he interacts with me is based on his knowledge of me.
Yeah.
So if we don't learn who the fuck our kids are and how they see things, how do you expect to truly be parenting them or helping them get through whatever it is that they're getting through? Because I remember there was a time in my life where things were real dark and like there was nobody there for me, and I felt like nobody understood. Whether they did or not isn't really the point. It's that they couldn't because they didn't try, right? Or that when they did try, it wasn't based on my actual experience or the emotions I was going through, or nobody told me what my emotions were or helped me understand what they were until I started going to counseling. And by that point, I was so oppositionally defiant. If anybody told me anything, I said, "Fuck you."
Yep. God damn, it's beautifully spoken, dude, especially as a parent.
Yeah.
Oh, he is.
Yeah, see?
What's up?
I noticed him on the phone, and I was like, fuck, he's not on the actual screen so we can actually see him. I was like, once Stanley's done, I'm going to fucking let him know so we can include him in there.
Nice.
But, dude, that was so beautiful, bro. It almost made me cry, bro.
That
dude,
is really well spoken.
I'm about to be a father pretty soon, and a lot of my thoughts is how am I going to teach my child, or how to be a dad, first of all, because I've never been a fucking dad before. But you
take that word "teach" out of your vocabulary.
Well, okay. Well, there you go. I need advice, and I'm glad to hear that you're getting a hang of things. And the way you speak about it is so beautiful, bro. I love the way you said things, like removing obstacles from your child's life, and then being able to sit down and ask him, kind of dissect his thought process, because a lot of parents, their kid's a little shit, and they just fuck it, whatever. My kid's hitting me in the side of my ribs. I'm just gonna go on about my life. It doesn't hurt.
Yeah, they don't really wonder why.
Yeah, but you kind of ask him and you dissect his thought process, and it helps you better understand your child. Because that whole fucking chaining a gay person to a table was an experience I had with my dad, Juan, if you didn't know. I'm not gay, but he once made a statement where I was arguing with him about gay people because my dad super religious, and I told him, "Hey, Dad, I don't fuck with that ideas. I don't fuck with those ideas that gay people go to hell because they're out here, loving whoever the fuck they want to love." And I was like, "Well, just to let you know, if you came out gay, I'd tie you to a fucking table until you weren't gay anymore." And he was being super serious about it, and I was going through that phase where I was fucking listening to metal, growing out my hair, and he didn't understand any of that because he couldn't relate to me. He couldn't relate to the fact that fuck, bro, I want long hair because I love long hair. Fuck you. And he thought I was going through a full blown phase of going gay. In his eyes, long hair meant you're gay, and it was the dumbest way for it. He's a lot better now that I've grown up and I'm sat down and talked to him like, "Dad, hey, you probably shouldn't think that way." Yeah. And he was low-key fucking racist too, but I won't go into this conversation. But essentially, there was a lot of times where he expressed his opinions on things, and they were, in my opinion, fucking terrible. And I had to tell him, I was like, "Dad, you can't fucking call black people N-words because you don't fucking, you know what I mean? Just because they're yelling about, they're not even doing anything. They're just listening to music loud. Like we'll drive down the neighborhood and there'll be some loud rap music. My dad will be like, fucking, and then I'll look over and it's like a bunch of fucking Mexicans, you know, barbecuing outside. I'm like, Dad, you didn't even look to see if it was actually fucking black people. Like, you know, like you already have these negative thought processes. That's not okay.
And they don't think they're racist.
Exactly. And this is the same guy telling me that if I'm gay, I'm going to hell. Dad, what the fuck? Like, look at the amount of hatred you carry in your heart for people that you don't even know. I don't hate anybody, Dad. And the fact that, the fact that I can understand that, well, not really understand. Let me backtrack because I'm fucking not Englishing really well. But I believe wholesomely that I developed a personal relationship with God as I grew up. It wasn't like one of those things where I instantly just kind of said, you know what, fuck God, fuck the Catholic Church, I'm out, fuck you guys, peace, bitch. It was one of those things where I slowly drew away from religion, and I thought to myself, you know what, my God doesn't hate gay people. My God doesn't fucking hate people for being, non-believers. My God just wants people to be good fucking people, and that's it. Because if I'm being completely honest with you, if I end up dead and everything I believed in was wrong and there's a heaven and hell and all this shit and I'm in the front of the pearly fucking gates and he's looking at my whole life determining whether or not I'm going to burn my entire life. If he tells me, you know what, Enrique, you're going to go to hell because you thought gay people should have rights like normal people, go to hell. I'm going to be like, you know what, God, I don't give a fuck. I don't want to be in your shitty ass heaven anyways, nigga. Send my ass to hell. I don't give a fuck. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say the N-word. Fuck, we had to cut that, but... Anyways, it was just one of those things where I was like, you know what? If that's where all the if people like you, Dad, are going to heaven, this was the meanest thing I probably ever said to my dad, bro. And it was after like reading a Native American story where that dude's getting the bricks laid on top of his chest. I was, I'm gonna hit my dad with that shit. And I was like, Dad, if people like you go to fucking heaven, I don't want to go there. I don't give a fuck. I'm gonna go party down in hell. I don't give a fuck.
Hell sounds like it's cooler anyway.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. You don't have people fucking judging you and shit, especially for having sex before marriage. Fuck that gay shit. But I'm sorry. Cut that. Fuck. All right.
I've always had like a weird understanding of that, or like a question. Whenever people say shit like that, I'm like, bro, you really give a fuck what I do with my dick? Like, fuck, you care that much?
Dude, let me fucking get into abortion, bro, because I know that's a huge cornerstone about religious arguments, because obviously you want to preserve life, fucking life is good, this and that, yada, yada. But you also see, memes that I kind of agree with, where you see people yelling at a pregnant woman for wanting to get an abortion, but the moment that the baby's born, you get this meme where they're like, well, I hope you sure as fuck don't get fucking, food stamps, I hope you're fucking working, I don't know, you know what I mean? Like, they don't want to, as soon as that baby comes out of the vagina, it's not the problem anymore. And I hate to be really fucked up or be super callous about it, but a lot of the times when I come across people who I disagree with in regards to like abortion and shit, I ask them, right now, last night, approximately so-and-so amount of people aborted a baby. How much sleep did you lose last night? Oh, what do you mean? I didn't lose any sleep. Exactly. So why the fuck do you care? If I'm being honest with you, I know maybe one person in my entire life that's had an abortion. And I went to sleep like a fucking baby that night. I'm super okay with it, and it's going to sound super fucked up. I really don't give a fuck, and I really don't believe that you give a fuck. I get it that between a couple, there's a conflict, and I think that's something that they have to resolve amongst themselves. Obviously, you've got a dad and you got a mother. They're both creating this, they're both creating life. I think their input matters more than the input of the outside world, because no matter fucking what, I tell you what, if that girl doesn't want that fucking baby, she's not gonna have that fucking baby. She's gonna go find a coat hanger somewhere and she's gonna yank that fucker out. That's it. It is what it is, and it's fucked up. And in my opinion, I think there should be avenues where these people can do that safely. Or if not, there should be programs where people can get psychological help for them to understand what parenting is like if they think about parenting. But the thing is, the moment somebody says they're thinking about aborting their child, you get a lot of people that swarm on top of them and they start telling that they're terrible people for having those thoughts to begin with, rather than being like Mr. Beautiful Downey over here, who's a great fucking dad and says, hey, why do you want to go through with this? What are the obstacles that are in front of you that are preventing you from wanting to have this child, and addressing those issues instead? And even if you, like, for example, if I had a daughter, she got pregnant with the dude, her boyfriend, let's say, and she comes up to me and she says, Dad, I don't want this baby. In my mind, it turns into a completely different story. I'm gonna want to take care of my baby girl. I'm gonna ask her, hey, why don't you want to have this baby? And I don't give a fuck what she says. Even if she says, well, I just don't like being fucking big. Okay, whatever, sweetheart. If you think that's big enough of a reason for you not to have a baby, then you're not going to have this baby. And in my opinion, I have no fucking business. Even if it's my daughter, I have no business in determining whether or not she's going to be a mom or not. That's her fucking choice. And I really do believe that across the board with all women. If they choose not to have a fucking child, and especially if I'm not related to her or her decision doesn't affect me, I'm going to be 100% honest. I don't give a fuck. Go fucking abort your baby. It sounds super callous, but go ahead. That's just a decision that you make that I believe I have no choice in. And probably going to piss a lot of people off by saying that, but I don't give a fuck, and I know you don't give a fuck. I'm going to let somebody else take the floor. I'm sorry.
Well, that just made me think of this meme that I always go to when this abortion topic comes up. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
Stop abortion at the source. Vasectomies are reversible. Make every young man have one when he's deemed financially and emotionally fit to be a father.
Dude, I've
It will
actually
be
thought about
reversed.
doing that before.
What's that? Did the idea of regulating a man's body make you uncomfortable? Then mind your fucking business.
Exactly.
And you know,
boy.
like, speaking of, like, men getting vasectomies, though, like, how many young kids nowadays, Danley, do you know, like, especially us being in the military, right? So we meet a lot of, like, fucking 19, 20-year-olds and shit. Like, ask them how many wear condoms. None of them these days, bro. None of them, right? And what I think my brother, like, just got a vasectomy. And, like, when you really think about it in the grand scheme of things, $2,000 to, like, get snipped isn't a whole lot of money compared to, like, what a kid's gonna cost you.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
This is very true.
The average
But
person... Oh, sorry. Go on.
The other side of that argument, though, is premarital sex and, like, what it can cause in and of itself. And I'm going to get a little personal and tell me if I need to stop, my boy.
Just go.
But when you're a hoe, as a man, you create problems in your relationships. So when we're talking about, like, earlier we were bringing up Christianity and these macros and, like, how do you tell a dude to not fuck a bunch of bitches because it's going to cause problems, right? Because somatically, like, in your body, it feels good and it's hedonistic and you want this good feeling. But when you're having sex with this woman, I'm going to go spiritual for a second. You're sharing energies,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
But more scientifically speaking, what you're doing is you're creating an image of a woman in your mind. You're essentially telling yourself and putting it out there that this is the type of woman that I want. And you can tell yourself mentally, like, yo, I don't really like hoes. I'm looking for the right woman, blah, blah, blah. How are you going to find the right woman if you're fucking a bunch of hoes?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
No,
And then we all want to talk about how nobody likes hoes and why are there all these women being hoes? Well, what are we telling them that we want? Like, as a species or as a male, right? What gets them attention? It's not the girl that's posting fucking her food on her Instagram. It's the bitch that shows her butthole. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
so we want in one hand, but we shit in the other one. And then I just go to my daughter. Like, the moment I had a daughter, I was like, fuck. I'm going to create the image of what a man is for the rest of her life. Like, what is she going to want, right? And it's psychologically proven in, like, a lot of studies that you end up chasing or marrying a mirror image or the image of your mother or your father, depending on if you're male or female or whatever your orientation is. But I'm just trying to imbue or embody the best image that I can fucking create.
That's
right?
gorgeous. That's beautiful.
And
bro.
you know what I'm saying? That's what I'm trying to do. And then I know when I wasn't doing that, right, I was creating a lot of issues in my own personal life where, like, this one woman would be a hoe, and then I would start to see all women as this, and then I would be just essentially putting myself in a vulnerable position to be hurt by this woman, knowing damn well she's going to hurt me.
Yeah.
And sometimes you have to learn those lessons the hard way.
Holy fuck.
And I know exactly what you're talking about. Anyway.
I mean, let's be fucking honest here, bro. When you see a dude with, like, 4 baby mamas and, like, fucking 6 kids, nobody fucking cares. But the moment you see a lady with, like, 3 kids from 3 different baby daddies, she's a hoe.
Yeah, there's a double standard.
Yeah, people have a problem with that, and it's the same thing. You know, you see a dude who fucks a bunch of girls, and for the most part, I hardly ever see anybody get blowback for that. But you see a girl that's like fucking the same amount of dudes as that guy is fucking girls, and she's the fucking school hoe. You know, like everybody's fucked her all of a sudden. You know, like
I promise you, I push back when dudes be doing that shit.
oh
my
boy,
man will tell you.
Boy.
Yeah, he's right. He's right.
Because I'll tell him, like, you're doing something and expecting something else to happen.
Yeah.
Right.
Dude, it's, double standard's fucking real, bro. I'm telling you, bro. It's fucking... Here's another thing that... another argument I get with my uncles, bro, because I have, two sides of the spectrum. My mom's side of the family are super Americanized, very strong, independent women. Same thing with my dad's side of the family. Except... my dad's side of the family is very traditional, and they're very man of the house is the man of the house. The women stay home, do whatever the fuck the man says. You stay home, fuck, have kids, raise the kids, make good food. That's it. And essentially, I have a lot of aunts that have been doing that for fucking 20 plus years now. And I'm a grown man now, and I have problems with that. So every time we're at a party or something like that, and I get up to get my own food, well, this is an instance that happened. I got up to get my own food because... fuck, I'm not having my wife get my own food. Like, if she wants to get her food, she'll get her food. I'll get my food with her. We're going to have a good time. She gets her serving, I get my serving. And I didn't think anything of it. But I get back, and everybody's like, why are you getting your food? Doesn't your woman get you food? Like, does she not do anything? And then they were just kind of talking to me like my wife's fucking lazy. You know what I mean? I sat down, I ate my food for a little bit, and I was like, wait a minute. You guys have a problem with my wife not getting me my food? And they're like, yeah, that's her job. Oh boy. I was like, boy. And then I just started roasting them. I was like, first of all, you guys don't want your women to get jobs because you're afraid they're going to find another man. So what does that tell me? That tells me that each one of you guys aren't good enough husbands to your fucking wives where you can't trust them to go fucking outside of the house because you're afraid. As a matter of fact, you know that they're going to find a better man out there that's going to treat them right. That's some insecurity right there, bro. Like, that's literally some pussy shit. And I'm sorry, dad, uncles. I don't give a fuck. I can let my wife go wherever the fuck she wants, but I know that she loves me because of me, and she can leave whenever she wants. But the fact that she chooses to stay with me indicates to me that I'm secure and I'm doing my job as a husband because she loves me enough to stay home with me, make food for me and spend time with me and want to make a family with me. And I love that idea. I don't love the idea of me snatching a woman, making her super dependent on me, and being the only source of income because that gives me leverage over her to make decisions in the house. And to have her clean the fucking house. And, and every now and then I'll hear them shit on their wives. Like, they'll come home and they don't want to do anything, but they want to go out and they want to go on vacation, this and that. And the first thing that comes out of their mouth is, well, you don't work. You don't know what it's like to be tired. Well, you don't fucking let her work, bro. Like, what do you expect? Yes, a shit ton of kids. All of them have a shit ton of kids. And their kids see
I'm going to tell you right now. My wife is a stay-at-home mom. I would not trade with her for all of the money in the fucking world. I don't give a fuck. Like, because you have to be, like, to be a good parent, you have to be on your game 100% of the time. Like, the moment you're irritable and you show that to your kids, you're like, fuck, I feel bad now because it's not your fault. I was just upset. So you're, like, just always on top of it at all times. And then you're trying to keep the house clean. And you're, dude, fuck that. And it's... So that leads me into something about the masculine and the feminine that I forgot to bring up earlier. So the masculine is form, the feminine is function. And what ends up happening is most men want to be in this solid state, right? Mm-hmm. This just chill. Like, I just want this. The feminine never wants that, ever. The feminine wants motion at all times, right? So when you're talking to a woman, and you're like, why are you always bringing up problems? Why do you just want to talk about shit? Yeah. Why can't it just be okay? It's because that's not what the feminine is. The feminine is motion. The feminine is movement, and it's all growth. You know what I'm saying? Oh. So like when the masculine, when we come home and we're like, oh, I'm just tired and I want to chill. Number one, you're not growing. Number two, That's not what the fuck being in a relationship is. Like, you don't get to just come home and then now I have a servant that does everything for me. It's like, if you have that relationship dynamic where that's what she wants to do or whatever, and that's your love language between each other, that's a different fucking story. But if that's what you come into a relationship expecting, you're kind of a turd.
I agree. And that's my biggest problem. A lot of the times, I hate speaking about my personal family so much because I love them to death, and they're not the same as they used to be, I promise. But, you know, I used to ask my mom as a teenager that same reason. I was like, Mom, you always talk about wanting to learn how to drive and learning how to work. Why don't you just do that? Well, your dad doesn't want me to do that because he's afraid that I'm going to leave or do this and that, yada, yada. I was like, Dad, and I told her, like, Mom, that's kind of really sad, first of all. And I didn't even know any of that I didn't even know about that. And then same thing, I asked my aunts and all of them, and then they were all like, yeah, the reason we don't know how to drive or do this and that is because your uncles don't let us do that. What do you mean? I was like, what do you mean they don't let you do that? Well, they don't let us do that. Well, what are they gonna do if you do that? And they just look at me baffled, like they've never ever thought about fucking raising their hand at their husband because that's just the way they were raised. You know, they were also raised in a Mexican household with mama and daddy is telling you, you're gonna grow up to be a good wife, or your husband goes to work and you do this and that they've never even thought about what would happen if they decided to say, you know what? Fuck all this. I'm going to go work. I'm going to go learn how to drive. Fuck you. Because every time I ask them, well, what would happen if you one day decided to go learn how to drive and work? And they just sat there like, I didn't even know that was an option.
Yeah.
And it just blew my mind, bro. But
after meeting all the dudes that I've met in my life, the one thing that I want for my daughter is so that she is independent enough that she can tell a dude to go fuck himself.
Yeah.
Get the fuck away from me. I don't want to, like, if she doesn't want to be in a relationship, she doesn't ever feel stuck.
Facts, yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Because you see that a lot in the older generations where, like, the wife never left because she was stuck, basically.
Exactly. And fuck
that.
God damn, it was way harder to do that way back in the day. Not even actually way back in the day. Let's think back 100, 200 years where divorce was not even an option, bro. Like, as soon as you were married,
the generation
that
before
was
us.
it. Exactly. As soon as you got married, that was it. You're not going anywhere. You're about to have 10 fucking babies if you want to. That's it. And
this goes back to that rebellion that children have. Like, I think of that as a good, positive affect that children have, right? Something that's intrinsic within children is that when they see something is wrong, they're going to buck it. And that's unless you beat it out of them. And then when you beat them out of them, they just repress those feelings. Yeah. So, like, I use when my children will, talk back to me or whatever. And sometimes it's ignorant and sometimes they have a point. Sometimes daddy was wrong. I'm like, oh, you're right. And then I correct it. And then we continue on with our day. But if you just continue living your life that way, you end up stuck in a situation that you feel like you're trapped in. Fuck that. Bro, I don't want that for my kids.
There is no weirder feeling than a kid telling you were acting like a bully. You know, like they see you interact with somebody else, and they let you know immediately afterwards, like, hey, you're kind of fucked up for that. And then you sit there and you're like, God damn it, like maybe I am really fucked up, because in their eyes, they're supposed to be on my side. That's my little brother, you know what I mean? And if my little brother's telling me I'm wrong, I'm wrong. And a lot of the times, I think it's easier for me to believe kids, because I just think kids, the younger they are especially, don't really know how to lie that well. You know, like, I feel like lying is kind of one of those things you acquire through experiences, where you learn how to lie better. You figure out when's an appropriate time to lie, what's the best way to lie, and, just kind of how to break it down with people. But if I ask, like, my little siblings anything, bro, they're super honest with me. Like, I ask them, hey, did I gain any weight? Yeah, you got kind of fat, Enrique. Fuck, okay. If I were to ask my mom, she's like, no, mijo, you look just fine. You look perfect. You look healthy. I asked my sibling, like, not even 5 seconds later, hey, you think I'm fat? Yeah, you got kind of fat, bro. I'd be like,
well, they haven't like developed what you would think like is kind of like a bias. Yeah,
right? Exactly.
Like, well, you don't give a fuck what like other people think as much. So you're not like trying to lean one way or the fucking other on any topic. You're just like, whatever, I'm just gonna fucking say what I think.
Dude, I think fucking kids are fucking amazing. I think I've talked about this before, how wherever I talk from here on forward for the next 5 minutes, pure speculation. Don't fucking assume this is gospel or scientific evidence or any of that bullshit. But anyways, I wholesomely believe that kids are living in a different reality than we are. Now, very loosely, let me explain myself. I've explained this before. I don't know if you've heard this one, but when it comes to hearing, humans hear within a certain spectrum of audio, right? Human beings can hear, 40 hertz to like 20 kilohertz. But as you age, your hearing degrades. And not only that, but the younger you are, the more amplified the sounds are. So if you hear a dish crash on the floor, you're not going to hear that as loud as a younger child is, because that child's ear canals are smaller. So on top of being able to perceive higher frequencies than you, they are also capable of hearing things louder than you. That is scientifically proven. So when you have some child who has like an imaginary best friend, or let's say they hear some things, and even as far as seeing some things that you don't perceive, you shouldn't automatically disregard their concerns. So a lot of accounts you'll hear kids, we'll talk about reincarnation later, but a lot of times you hear kids say, hey, Dad, I heard something. Or you'll see a kid and you'll ask, talking to nobody, and you'll go up there and you'll ask them, hey, who are you talking to? Oh, well, I'm talking to my best friend. Or, hey, I'm talking to so-and-so. You hear these stories. And in my mind, I used to think that was all, weird, wacky stories. But as I grew up and I started understanding audio and the human perception, I started to realize, like, well, you know what? It may very well be possible that kid heard something that we're not able to perceive. And we did this experiment. I told my mom this, and she didn't believe me. And so we did this test where, I was outputting like 25 kilohertz. Nobody can hear it. And then
who was all involved in this?
I have my little sister, who is 9 years old, my mom, who is 41, I'm 24, and my little brother, who is fucking 6 or 7 years old at this time. You know what? No, he's 7 years old now. So he's a little younger than my sister. So I start off at 25 kilohertz and I start coming down. As soon as I reach like fucking 18 kilohertz, my little brother says, I hear it. And I'm like, okay, all right, well, let me write that down, 18 kilohertz. And I slowly start coming down and reach like 16.4 kilohertz. My sister says that she thinks she hears it. And by this time, I can see my little brother is kind of disturbed because I cranked that volume all the way up. And I still couldn't hear it. My mom couldn't hear it. And so we slowly start coming down. And then once we get to like 13-something kilohertz, I hear it. And then my mom she's chilling. And I go down to like 12 kilohertz and my ears are banging, bro. My siblings are already covering their ears. My ears are fucking hurting. And I'm looking at my mom. She's just chilling. And I reached like 10.8 kilohertz. And that's when she's like, I hear it. I was like, Mom, my fucking ears are bursting right now. And look at the kids. The kids are all like, covering their ears and shit because it's hurting their ears. And then I stop and she looks at me and she's like, oh my God. And I was like, yeah, that's a clear example to demonstrate to you that these kids are perceiving and hearing things at different levels than we are. And that's why I think that if there was a supernatural and if there was a paranormal, I guess, let's just say for lack of better terms, there is other entities outside of our spectrum of reality. If anybody's going to be sensitive to perceiving these things, it's going to be children or animals such as cats or dogs, which are very good examples as to why every time some paranormal bullshit happens, a cat's a fucking high alert or the dog's barking at nothing. And that's because these animals are living in different spectrums than we are. A dog whistle. Have you guys ever heard a dog whistle go off? I bet you a fucking dog a mile away can hear that bitch. Exactly. That's what I'm saying. If you ever hear a dog whistle go off, you don't. But the fucking dog over there hears you. The fucking dog over there hears you. And every other fucking dog around this radius of I don't know how fucking long that whistle goes, they all hear it. But you don't. And it's stuff like that makes me start to think, well, what else is outside of our perception? because it's kind of like a perfect analogy where somebody describes a worm with no eyes. You know, a worm just travels through the earth, it can't see, it feels its way through, or a mole, for example, something that's blind. And well, what do you think the thought process would be for that mole if it even understood or even saw for the first time for a brief second that there is a whole completely different world out there that they cannot perceive because they lack the sense to perceive it? That's fucking crazy. And then you have things such as, even though we can't personally perceive things, this is why I love human innovation, because you have the ability to create things that allow you to perceive these things. For example, night vision goggles. You can see IR when using nods, but you can't see IR with your naked eye. Same thing with UV lights. There's a lot of things that we can't perceive, but that doesn't mean that they're necessarily there. And I showed Danley the other day what a modulated signal looks like. It's a fucking waveform that's got all kinds of crazy information inside of it. So you take a low frequency that contains information, you stack that on top of a carrier frequency that's a higher frequency, and that's how you transmit information over the air. And these things are all over us, but we can't see that.
Explain that a little bit more.
All right, I got maybe like 5 minutes, but I'm going to fucking break that bitch down real smooth. So what did you want me to explain?
What is a modulated frequency?
Okay, so think of, I want you to have this question in your head. How are we able to make Wi-Fi work? How is it that we are able to pass information wirelessly? Now, think of this really old technology that has already existed before. Think of FM radio, right? Mm-hmm. So you are able to, you know how each FM AM radio has certain frequencies, right? Mm-hmm. And when you tune in, you're able to, when you tune into that frequency, you're able to actually hear something, right? So
hold on. Let's start this again. Okay. Let me preface this with something. So what is a modulated frequency? Because in the Army, I understand frequencies because of a piece of equipment called a Goldie, where we're looking for a command wire. And in a command wire, it has to be 6 feet. It has to be connected to a power source, and then it transmits a signal. So you can have high, medium, and low. So okay. A low frequency would be like it doesn't really have peaks and valleys. It's real small. Yep. And then a mid-level has a little bit more. And then a high frequency has very short wavelengths. Yep. So the difference for me, the way I understand it, is a high frequency has short wavelengths, a low frequency has wide.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, you got it. And the reason it's wide, don't think of up and down too much. You're talking about amplitude. That's when you talk about power. But when you think about frequency and wideness, the frequency is measured in a unit called hertz. So when you hear 60 hertz, 120 hertz, especially when you're thinking about video games or monitors, it's the exact same thing. It's the exact same thought process. How many cycles, which is one full oscillation upwards and downwards, which is a little fucking sideways S, how many complete cycles do you have per second? That's how frequency is measured. So no matter what, if all of these frequencies are having a 60-second window, the higher frequency, which has more cycles per second, is going to have much more wavelengths, like Danley explained, and the wavelengths are going to be shorter because they're more condensed. There's more cycles in a second. When you're talking about lower frequencies, like he mentioned, you're going to have less cycles in the same second that you're measured at the high frequency. Except this time, because there's less cycles, you're going to have really fucking stretched out frequency waveforms, because they're at lower frequencies. So the wider they are, the lower frequency it is. The tighter they are, the higher the frequency it is per second. So that's pretty much the breakdown of frequencies. So you have this waveform. That's a frequency. And in order for you to understand modulation, is that you are taking a carrier frequency. So let's say you have a waveform, right? On top of that waveform, you are going to include another waveform. And this waveform is going to ride on that waveform, which is considered the carrier frequency. And when you have a receiver, what it is going to do, it is going to demodulate that information. So you set it to whatever frequency you want it to receive. So let's say we're broadcasting over the radio. You guys are on the Army, so you know if you're broadcasting at a certain frequency, the other radios are going to be looking for that signal at that frequency. And when they receive it, they know to demodulate the information in that frequency. So they already have an expected
so that's
value.
single channel plain text.
Yep.
Yes.
So it already knows to look for a signal in that frequency, and when it picks up that waveform, it is going to demodulate the waveform inside of the waveform, and that's how it's going.
So
to
that would be our
turn
voice.
Exactly.
That would be our voice over the.
Yep.
Okay.
Exactly. Boom, bitch. And so that is how it is going to demodulate and receive that information, and then take the waveform and fucking amplify it to the point where it can get the speaker to produce noises for you to hear and like listen to somebody talk. That's essentially the dumbed down version of all of this. So what I'm trying to get at is we have all of these things that exist all around us. Believe me, all around you. Your cell phones, your fucking, your neighbor's Wi-Fi, your Wi-Fi. You have all these things that exist around you. It's not just, if you're alone in a room, but you're full of around a bunch of technology, you are not alone, buddy. There's a lot of shit going on around you that you can't see. And it's
Alan Watts has a saying that the average everyday consciousness leaves out more than it takes in.
Yeah, oh, damn! But that's one of the biggest things. The biggest things is that I believe that it is very possible that there's a lot more going on outside of our perception of reality that can possibly answer that holds answers to a lot of the questions that we have. And it could very much well be that we are that mole that's blind and can't see. Because let's say you have this mole and the moles can talk to each other in mole language, and all of a sudden the mole's like, yo, I think there's a shit that exists outside of us, man. I think we can't see that shit, but I'm pretty sure it's there. And then all of a sudden everybody else calls him a fucking doofus. Yeah, right. We don't believe you. It's not true. We've never observed it before. It can't possibly be true. But little do they know that that mole that has that crazy idea isn't entirely wrong. And
do you know Carl Sagan?
Negative, but give me a rundown, son.
Carl Sagan has the exact same argument, but he calls it flatland. So he's talking about there's two-dimensional creatures that, squares, circles, or whatever, and he has these pieces of paper on his desk. And then he's like, so just imagine that they only know left and right and forward and back. That's the only directions that they know. And then imagine for a second, and he takes an apple, and you pull the apple up. The apple would only be intersecting flatland at like one plane throughout. But if it picked up one of those two-dimensional creatures and it went up, how would that creature come back and explain where the fuck up was to everybody else around it that didn't know what up was?
Yeah.
Well, that's like the thought of another dimension.
Yeah.
Well, he goes further into talking about what a fourth dimensional being would be, and then that's where the idea of the tesseract is. It's like a cube inside of a cube, and it like rotates and shit. And it's Carl Sagan is a very exactly along the lines of what you were just explaining.
Damn. And you see, man, it's not. Yeah, it's one of the biggest things. I personally, I don't fucking know anything. Let me backtrack. I feel like I don't know anything because the more I learned and the more I've come to a realization that I don't fucking know anything. The more questions you answer, the more you realize that there's a lot of questions that you don't have answers to. And that's why I don't take people very serious when they're, cocky sons of bitches who think they're the smartest fucking dudes in the world. Because in my mind, I'm thinking, whoa, you really kind of haven't learned a lot if you think you know everything, because the more you know, the more you realize you don't fucking know. And even in, theoretical physics and all these high levels of thinking, they come to certain points where they're like, yeah, we don't know yet. A lot of this stuff we're talking about is all theoretical. And then 5 years down the line, they're changing their way of thinking.
So there's this concept that I've been working with, and it's like people learn their first truth and then they beat people over the head with it. right? They learn, like, that's what you would call the woke community, right? They think they know everything. They think they're right, blah, 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 blah. But I've had a bunch of, I guess you would call them spiritual experiences in my life, like transcendental experiences or whatever that we can get into a different time. But the lesson that I learned from every one of them is that the moment you learn the answers to life's questions, right, you get all the answers. Life changes the questions.
Yeah.
Every single time.
Oh, shit. That's well put. Yeah.
Most people do not engage in a methodical process of questioning, evaluation of assumptions, investigation, information.
I decided to play it safe and I shouldn't. In a hoodie with my face all crooked. Suckers hate, it's all goody. They just wanna say what you shouldn't, say what you couldn't do.